Last few weeks and over the past decade, auto companies have seen record profits, including the last few years, because of the extraordinary skill and sacrifices of the UAW workers. But those record profits have not been shared fairly, in my view, with those workers. Just as the Treasury Department has released a report pointing out that the most comprehensive report ever dealing with how unions are good for both union workers and non-union workers and the overall economy. Unions raise workers' wages, they said, incomes, increase home ownership, increase retirement savings, increase access to critical benefits like sick leave and child care, and reduce inequality, all of which strengthen our economy for all workers. That's because unions raise standards across the workplaces and entire industries, pushing up wages and strengthening benefits for everyone. That's why strong unions are critical to a growing economy and growing it from the middle out, the bottom up, not the top down. That's especially true as we transition to a clean energy future, which we're in the process of doing. I believe that transition should be fair and a win-win, for auto workers and auto companies. But I also believe the contract agreement must lead to a vibrant, made-in-America future that promotes good, strong, middle-class jobs that workers can raise a family on. Where the UAW remains at the heart of our auto economy, and where the big three companies continue to lead in innovation, excellence, quality, and leadership. Last night, after negotiations broke down, the UAW announced a targeted strike at a few big three auto plants. Let's be clear. No one wants a strike. Say it again. No one wants a strike. But I respect workers' right to use their options under the collective bargaining system. And I understand the workers' frustration. Over generations, auto workers sacrificed so much to keep the industry alive and strong, especially through the economic crisis and the pandemic. Workers deserve a fair share of the benefits they helped create for an enterprise. I do appreciate that the parties have been working round the clock. And when I first called them at the very first day of the negotiations, I said, please stay at the table as long as you can to try to work this out. And they've been around the clock, and the companies have made some significant offers. But I believe they should go further to ensure record corporate profits mean record contracts for the UAW. Let me say that again. Record corporate profits, which they have, should be shared by record contracts for the UAW. And just as we're building an economy of the future, we need labor agreements for the future. It's my hope that the parties can return to the negotiation table to forge a win-win agreement. To continue our active engagement, I'm dispatching 2 members of my team to Detroit, Acting Labor Secretary Julie Hsu and White House Senior Advisor Gene Sperling, both of whom have been involved up to now, to offer their full support for the parties in reaching a contract. The bottom line is that auto workers help create America's middle class. They deserve a contract that sustains them in the middle class. So thank you very much. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Mr. President, at what point would you get directly involved in the negotiations? Should Hunter get a pardon, Mr. President?
President Biden leaving the Roosevelt Room after delivering remarks on a historic simultaneous strike by the United Auto Workers against the big three Detroit-based automakers. Historically, UAW strikes have been targeted at one automaker, feeling that resolution there would then lead to effects for other automakers. This time, the union is striking against all three. We want to bring in our senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe from the North Lawn of the White House. Ed, the president said record profits should bring about a record contract, clearly putting his White House at least nominally on the side of the striking workers.
Absolutely, which is no surprise given that this is the president who likes to say he is the most pro-union president, at least in modern American history, and one that's already been endorsed by elements of the AFL-CIO, although not the United Auto Workers, which of course is now on strike. What was also telling in his remarks is he talks about a clean energy future that is fair and win-win, because one of the sticking points in these negotiations has to do with the ongoing transition to electric vehicles and the fact that while they may be great for the environment, they're going to be tough on the auto worker world because it's going to require less labor, fewer parts to construct those vehicles, even as this administration is pushing for their wider use and their wider development and providing incentives to the auto companies to put them together. But the news there, he says, is the acting labor secretary, Julie Hsu, and Gene Sperling, a longtime economic advisor to Democratic presidents who's been appointed to serve as a point person on this, will be in Detroit in the coming days to help the auto companies and the auto workers reach some kind of an agreement. The White House likes to point out he's been read into this since July, having met with UAW leadership, has had Labor Department and White House officials briefing him on a regular basis, including when he was overseas in the recent days in India and Vietnam. But we'll wait and see what, if anything else, he might do, given that this is a tricky one for him. He's pro-union, but he's also sensitive to the idea that a prolonged strike could cause effects on the economy, which, of course, is the leading issue right now for voters as we head into an election year next year. Major.
Ed O'Keefe at the White House, thank you very much. I want to bring in our senior transportation correspondent, Chris Van Cleve, who joins us from Wayne, Michigan. So about 13,000 workers are on the picket lines right now, as you well know. Chris, the UAW membership, about 146,000. Every strike deals with big issues related to wages, pensions, and working conditions. But this also has another dimension of concessions made in the past. Explain that to our audience.
Sure. Think back to the Great Recession, 2008. The big three automakers teetered on the verge of collapse. In order to keep them afloat, workers agreed to a lot of concessions. You saw GM and, at the time, Chrysler, now Stellantis, go into bankruptcy. Ford avoided bankruptcy. There was a government bailout. Workers made a bunch of sacrifices. They now want to unwind many of those. They also would like to see a 4-day work week and pensions return. Those two are non-starters for the auto companies. They are moving on some of those concessions, restoring or getting rid of some of the structure that was created after 2008 that helped allow the automakers to have really a decade-long run here of pretty remarkable profits. They're also, pay, of course, is always a big factor here. The auto workers came in seeking about a 40% raise. The auto companies are closer to about 20% in their latest offers. We talked with Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, today about all of this, and she said part of what they have tried to do is not only offer a 20% raise, but also offer a protection to existing workers as they are making this transition to electric vehicles. You know, they assemble their own batteries so they can reassign, retrain people to go into the components for the electric vehicles in addition to the assembly of them. But she also has to balance the fact that non-union companies, competitors like Tesla and Toyota, their labor costs are far lower than the unionized big three. So when they make a contract, she told us quite frankly, if they agreed to all of the things the auto workers wanted, it would result in a company that would go into bankruptcy. So they don't want that, but they do want a deal, and they would like to get back at the table and get it done.
Chris Van Cleve, thank you so much. Joining us now, senior business and technology correspondent Jolene Kent. Jolene, what are the broader implications for the U.S. economy if this strike becomes what the president said he doesn't want to see, a prolonged standoff?
Major, we could see a hit to U.S. economic productivity. GDP, according to Bank of America, could take a hit of 1 to 2/10 of a percentage point per week as this goes on. But the bigger picture here is, what does this mean for consumers? If you look at how much this will cost American consumers in the economy, one economic group says that a 10-day strike would result in $5.6 billion in losses. About $2 billion of that is expected to fall on the shoulders of consumers, whether it's you trying to get your car fixed and you can't get that done, or if it's a dealership that's unable to staff and have to furlough or lay off workers. We could also see, if this strike continues and is prolonged, an impact on the supply chain as well. We expect to see impacts on parts manufacturers. The people who are making headlights and catalytic converters and brakes could also be impacted. The other thing that we really have to focus on here is, what does this mean for the Fed and for interest rates? Because right now, as you know, car inventory overall is still not as high as pre-pandemic levels back in 2019. And so as a result, car prices are still pretty high. We did see some encouraging news. Used car prices did start to come down over the past, past several months here, but that could end up being raising prices again. The strike could end up pushing those prices back up because supply is down. And that, of course, if you look at the broader economic picture, could be really painful for consumers. We're now facing people having to start repaying their student loans again, and we're looking at a potential government shutdown. And of course, those higher interest rates make it really expensive to borrow money. And so that sort of tuck and move towards recessionary behavior could be really painful for some consumers out there if this strike continues to be a prolonged situation. Major.
Jolene Kent, thank you so very much. I want to let you know our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Good day.
And we have been watching a CBS News Special Report. President Biden, as we just heard, is urging both sides to come back to the bargaining table.
Nathan Bomey joins us now. He is a business reporter with Axios. Thanks again for coming back to us. Well, Nathan, the president just addressed the historic strike. Just how damaging could it be to the U.S. economy overall?
Well, I think it depends on how far the UAW goes. For now, they're only doing 3 plants. Now, that is significant. It's, 13, 14,000 workers and, half a dozen vehicles. If the strike ends up being expanded to include other plants, then that's when this could really become a snowball for the president and for the economy, because at this point, the UAW is taking a very targeted approach. If they expand it to include the entire big 3, then really all bets are off, and that's where it could get ugly very fast.
Nathan, I know you've been covering this for quite some time, and I wonder, given that both sides currently appear to be far from reaching an agreement, do you see any areas there potentially where they could come together?
Well, they've already come to the table on wages a little bit. The automakers have raised their offer to 20% wage increases. The UAW is at 36%, so you can kind of see that gap closing. And then the automakers have already agreed to cost of living adjustments, which I think is a little surprising at the beginning of this process. I'm not sure you could have guaranteed that they would offer that, and they have. And so that is one place where they've made a concession. But again, I think benefits is where this is going to be a problem, because the automakers are simply not going to provide traditional pensions and retiree health care, which the UAW has demanded, because those are benefits that helped drive the automakers into bankruptcy in 2009, and they have bad memories of that. They don't want to go back to that era. So I'd be shocked if the automakers agree to that.
So pensions are off the table. What are the odds of a guaranteed bonus, end-of-year bonus? They just came off the top of my head.
No, I think that's a very realistic possibility. And in fact, the automakers are willing to offer that in all likelihood. That's not unusual. In fact, in the standard course of the contracts, usually the American auto workers will get a bonus based on the profits of their companies in North America. And so that's usually built into the contract, but a signing bonus would also be built into the contract. I think that is almost inevitable.
And Nathan, I'm wondering what else stood out to you from President Biden's remarks. Beforehand, we were talking about the fact that the president is in a bit of a tricky political position here. We heard the president sort of touch on that a little bit, but indirectly. So give us a sense of what stood out to you from his comments.
I thought he was really towing the line. I think it was not a full-throated endorsement of the UAW's position, and it certainly was not a big endorsement of the automakers' position here either. I think he really wants this to go away because this is just a headache for him. I thought there was one very notable line, which was he said that the automakers had made, quote, significant offers. I do not think that will be well received by the UAW, which does not agree that the offers are significant. So we'll see how the UAW responds to that. But overall, certainly, saying a lot of pro-union things. He wants the UAW's endorsement, so he's not going to criticize them outright. But he continues to say he wants both sides at the table. The UAW will argue the automakers are not at the table in good faith.
Yeah, tiptoeing across that line.
Yes.
It's really interesting to watch. Thank you.
Joining us now for more on this is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. So, Ed, we heard the president a short time ago. What did he have to say about the UAW strike?
Well, he basically said, keep talking. I think the most interesting thing out of this, in addition to what your previous guest just pointed out, is is the idea that there has to be a transition to a clean energy future that is, quote, fair and win-win. That is code around here for the fact that this is a White House that is pushing for the electric vehicle transition, that is providing government incentives to automakers and auto buyers to buy them, to make them, but they will require less labor than conventional vehicles that we've been driving since the dawn of time. And so that's part of the sticking point in these negotiations. So essentially what the president is saying there is, look, we got to move this industry forward. It's potentially going to cost jobs, so let's figure out how to do this in a fair and equitable way that doesn't necessarily cost jobs. And that is a big sticking point among so many others that have been presented by both sides. So as he said there, the acting labor secretary, Julie Hsu, and Gene Sperling, a longtime economic advisor to presidents of the Democratic Party, are headed to Detroit to work on this with the automakers and with the UAW in the coming days. We'll see if there's any developments through the weekend, but this remains a politically tricky one for the president. He is endorsed by most major labor unions, though not the UAW. He is someone who touts himself as the most pro-labor president in modern history, but he's also one sensitive to the idea that this could cause great economic pain, not only there in the swing state of Michigan, where Democrats have done quite well in recent years, but also nationwide if it stretches for several weeks, as some believe it might, given how far apart the automakers and the union are right now.
As you mentioned, President Biden has devoted much of his time to touting his economic agenda at events across the country. In fact, he did that just yesterday in Largo, Maryland. To what extent could this strike jeopardize the president's economic goals across the board?
Well, again, if it goes on for a while, it has the potential to upset the argument that the White House has been making that the policies enacted in the last 2.5 years or so are helping the economy rebound from the pandemic and are, in essence, helping fight inflation and avoid a recession. There are forecasts that say if this goes on even for just a few days, it could immediately have an adverse effect on Michigan's economy and other states where there are not only auto workers, but then auto supply companies that are going to be affected by this. And if over the long term there's no inventory, then it affects car dealers. It's going to affect your ability to buy a new vehicle or get it repaired if you're missing parts from those auto suppliers who can't open up because the strike is going on. So that is part of the sensitivity here as well. And again, while the union is pushing for this idea of a 4-day work week and a 40% pay raise, in part because of the way the concept of work is changing across the country and the fact that CEOs at these auto companies have been receiving about a 40% pay bump in recent years, that concept of a 40% raise and only working 4 days a week is not going to go over well with other workers in other industries, and that could eventually adversely affect the president's standing even more if those same voters recall that this is the president who has touted his relationship with labor unions through the years. So that's why this statement was somewhat tepid and threaded the needle, even if it did just sort of reinforce his belief that workers deserve to reap the benefits that many of these large corporations have in recent years.
Certainly a complicated political kind of issue for the White House. Ed O'Keefe for us, thank you so much. And we are going to take a quick break, but next we will hear from a former UAW spokesperson. This is CBS News.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in